Welcome back to Inside City Hall. While lawmakers in Washington continue to debate immigration reform and deportation rules, my next two guests are hoping that a new book will shine a light on the accomplishments and the challenges facing our city's diverse immigrant population. The book is titled All Faces, All Races, A Guide to New York City's Immigrant Communities. Here to talk more about the book are its co-authors, the founder and president of the Black Institute, Bertha Lewis, and the Institute's Director of Intercommunal Affairs, Dimitri Daniel Glinsky. Thank you both for being here, and good to see you.
Thank you.
And let's start with you. Bertha Lewis, known as a well-known activist. You've been running the Black Institute for a couple of years now. And why this book and why now?
Well, I guess the title says it all. All races and all faces need to be included and recognized in this whole conversation about immigration reform, and also that immigration is not just monolithic. There's blacker faces in immigration. There's many things that immigrants themselves share. The diversity visa between Eastern Europeans and Africans, and also for the Black Institute, we feel as though this immigration fight is a fight that is the new 21st century civil rights fight. We also have a lot of immigrant communities that are marginalized, never seen, hidden. We don't know the numbers, we don't know the data, and so the Black Institute, we are an action tank. We're a think tank that takes action, and so we want to be able to do data and research and academic studies which really highlight.
Well, that's what I found so fascinating about this. Let me ask you, Mr. Glinsky, to start with the data set. Where did this information come from? This is all, I take it, census data from the community survey?
Right. Most of it is almost all of it is publicly available on census website, American Community Survey, but it just was not brought together to represent this particular immigrant community.
Well, you swim in this data all the time. Were you surprised by any of it? I mean, there were particular ethnic groups and foreign-born populations here in the city where I've been basically almost all my life, and I'm looking at this like, well, gee, I didn't know that there were, X number of Peruvians and X number of Serbians. I mean, were you surprised at all?
Well, since indeed I have been working on data as part of my own organizing and advocacy work before we joined forces with the Black Institute, I would rather say, not surprised, but kind of certain things have been confirmed that there is significant inequalities among various immigrant groups, historic inequalities in numbers, in the ability to enter the country, in the ability to get regular legal status, and in economic opportunities. And these inequalities go back in the history to the famous National Origin Quota Act and other legislation that restricted immigration from Eastern Europe, restricted immigration from Africa and other countries.
Okay, very interesting. Let's take a look at sort of the big picture. You have there's a lot of graphs, a lot of charts. The percentage of total foreign-born population. So we know, and we hear all the time, 40% of New York City is foreign-born. Well, foreign-born from where? 13% Dominican Republic. I wouldn't have guessed that they were the number one group. I live in Brooklyn. I would have guessed Jamaican. 11% from People's Republic of China. I thought that was kind of interesting. And then right behind that, Mexico and Jamaica, tied at 6%. And these are not sort of the usual groups that you hear about in a lot of cases. And it has some implications. And then right behind Mexico and Jamaica, Guyana. And here again, in Brooklyn, I'm thinking, I was like, yeah, I know a lot of Guyanese. I didn't think that they were 5% of the foreign-born population. Now, as far as the politics of coming into the country, I mean, you referred to the fact that there are sort of regional and even country-specific quotas as far as giving out visas, travel visas, work visas, and so forth. How does that play out with the different groups here in the city?
Well, as a result of these differences, of course, as you said, we have very different size of various communities, and those that were not subjected historically to significant restrictions, at least in most of the 20th century, definitely much larger groups here in New York City. And of course, there are lots of countries from which, in fact, there is a high kind of demand for U.S. visa to come to the U.S., but they have very small share of actual recipients, and that sort of perpetuates this inequality.
Well,
But we also know that politically, and all politics are local in some place, when you have an immigration system that favors one group over the others, we know Haitians are treated a lot differently than Cubans, for instance. Some folks are granted asylum, some aren't. I mentioned the diversity visa before. The diversity visa is the #1 visa by which Africans and Eastern Europeans come to this country. If you cut that off, then you very greatly curtail their immigration. And so in this time when we are really having a conversation about comprehensive immigration reform, that means that you politically need to consider if this country is getting browner and we are going to be a majority of minorities, then we better start looking at these marginalized groups in a different way. Congressman Keith Ellison in his district, they have a huge number of folks from Somalia. Just this August, President Obama, for the first time ever, had an African summit, 50 nations, and immigration was not on the agenda.
Interesting. I mean, it's fascinating. I mean, you raise an important point, which is that we tend, especially in New York, because it's steeped in so much folklore, to think that immigration is just some natural process and people just kind of wash up on the shores at Ellis Island, when in reality, then and now, it is specific policies that favor certain countries, and we basically create our diversity. Let me just run through, we only have a couple of minutes, but Mexicans. The number of Mexicans, I mean, I just found it fascinating to flip through this, and I think everybody should take this and have this in their office or someplace. It's one thing to think that, there's a lot of Mexicans in New York. It's another to say 186,000, which is a lot more than I would have guessed. It's probably, maybe 100% more than I would have thought. Ecuadorians, this is another thing. I would never in a million years, if you put a gun to my head, I would not have guessed that there are more than 100,000 Ecuadorians in New York City. And there you go, 128,000 in fact. If we look at the Chinese, same idea. I mean, I know we've done a whole series here on the multiple Chinatowns. There's one in Sunset Park, and there's one in Flushing, and so forth. 350,000. That's a lot. That's a lot of people.
Over
it's a heck of a lot of people. Filipinos, and see, then there's the other groups that we tend not to think about so much. 55,000+ Filipino natives in New York City. I think that is fascinating. That's a much bigger number than I would have guessed. Indians, who are in fact making pretty big numbers as well, 78,000, would not have guessed that. Ghanaians, you mentioned, they're the largest of the African groups here in the city. That in itself was a surprise. I would have guessed Nigeria, or even Liberia, 26,000. And they tend to be clustered, and there's the borough breakdown there. So you've got page after page of this. Let me ask you a question though. What has tended to happen, and it's of great interest to me and the viewers of the show, is that you get a certain amount in a particular area, and the next thing you know, you start to see candidates, naturalized candidates, running for office. Where do you think what's an ethnic group that hasn't had a seat at the table of power that you think is going to maybe sort of start showing up in some of the elections soon?
Africans.
Africans
from the continent, because you're right. You do have pockets of places where there's concentrations. There's a huge Liberian population on Staten Island, and so just like in Washington D.C. and in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and around the country, you will begin to see the emergence of Africans. You've already seen the emergence of Eastern Europeans, Mark Jonai.
Albanian getting elected in the Bronx. Who knew?
And so what we're saying is this. This book, which we're very proud of,
Hold it up.
It's our first edition in our integration series, because we believe people need to be integrated. We started at 10,000 or more. The next edition will be 5,000 or more. And we want to present your very own signed
Okay, so I can hold it up too.
And we have an inscription there.
You even signed it. Very good. Okay. If you want to take a look, folks, at All Faces, All Races, Yeah, all races, all faces. You can head over to the Black Institute's website. That's theblackinstitute.org. Thanks a lot for coming by.
Tomorrow.
We are going to take a short break now, and coming up, the 4 members of our Consultants Corner will weigh in on Mayor de Blasio's handling of the Rachel Nordlinger controversy. You don't want to miss that. Stay with us.